In the height of the Great Depression, the quiet town of Macomb, Alabama had turned red with dust over the summer. Everything moved slowly, and people made do with what little they had. Macomb was an old town, with old family roots, old grudges between the families, and old ways of thinking which ran deep. On a street near the town square, the Finches lived in a modest but well-kept house. There was 6-year-old Jane Louise, nicknamed Scout, her older brother Jem, and their widowed father Atticus. Their mother had died when Scout was very young, leaving her with very few memories, but the children were lucky to have a respected lawyer for a father, who raised his children with kindness and patience, and with the help of Calpurnia, their strict but loving cook. Scout and Jem spent their early summers getting into mischief like most children do, playing games in the neighborhood and creating their own adventures. Scout was different to other little girls of her time, however, as she was stubborn and curious, and preferred overalls to dresses. She tried her best to keep up with Jem and their friend Dill, but while their games often took them through the friendly neighborhood that they lived in, one house in particular filled them with dread. The Radley home looked different to other houses on their street, a dark and shuttered building that had once been pretty ordinary, but now seemed larger than life thanks to the myths and speculation that had surrounded it over the years. It all started when Boo Radley, Nathan Radley's son, disappeared from public life, and rumors soon circulated among children and adults alike that he had gone mad, been killed and stuffed up the chimney, imprisoned in the basement, and other tall tales. Every child longed to get a glimpse of the reclusive figure, but were equally terrified of what they would see inside. And despite Atticus's scolding to leave the Radleys alone, Jem, Dill, and a reluctant Scout were also drawn by morbid curiosity towards the house, trying to tempt Boo out with notes, sweets, and other tricks. After a long summer, Scout begins to attend school with Jem, which turns out to be a major disappointment. Instead of nurturing her natural curiosity and intelligence, the teacher scolds her for knowing how to read early and insists that she keeps pace with the other children. These strict rules are not appealing to Scout, who is more of a free spirit, and she quickly learns that not all grown-ups are as fair and understanding as Atticus. This realization soon becomes even more apparent when their father is appointed to an extremely controversial case by the Macomb court. He is set to defend Tom Robinson, a black man accused of raping Mayella Ewell, a white woman. This case sparked huge outrage in their community, particularly because of the very prevalent racism of the Deep South. At school and in the streets, the attitude of the town begins to shift towards the Finches, simply because Atticus agreed to defend Tom, and whispers, insults, and abuse follow them everywhere. This is hard for Scout and Jem to understand, however, having grown up with a sensible father and a black housekeeper who was practically their substitute mother. As the trial approaches, Atticus's sister Alexandra comes to stay, determined to get his children in line and teach Scout how to be a lady. But Scout is stubborn and sharp and refuses to accept rules and behavior that seem unfair and hypocritical to her. Meanwhile, the mystery of Boo Radley has also been progressing, especially when strange gifts start to appear in the knothole of a tree outside the Radley house. Someone seemed to be trying to communicate with them, but there is still no sign of Boo or anyone else. The night before the trial, Tom Robinson is transferred to the county jail, and Atticus, sensing danger, decides to watch over him. Sure enough, an angry mob gathers outside, intending to lynch Tom before he can even stand trial. Atticus bravely goes outside to face them, but suddenly Scout, Jem, and Dill appear. Unaware of the danger, they had followed him to the jail, surprising both Atticus and the mob. Scout recognizes one of the men and innocently strikes up a conversation with him, unwittingly breaking the tension and shifting the mood. The men decide to leave, and a shaken Atticus realizes that the children's mistake probably saved both his and Tom's lives. The next day, Tom's trial was the talk of the town, and the courthouse overflowed with Macomb residents. Scout, Jem, and Dill managed to sneak into the seats above, however, where the town's black community were forced to sit separately. As Bob takes the stand, he paints a graphic picture, claiming to have come home to find his daughter being raped and beaten by Tom. However, Atticus's calm cross-examination pokes holes in many of his statements, and highlights the fact that Mayella's injuries were concentrated on the right side of her face. This means that she was likely beaten by someone who is left-handed, someone like her father. Next, a fragile-looking Mayella took the stand and confirmed her father's story. Tom had attacked her while she was alone at home and taken advantage of her vulnerability. She too, however, faltered under Atticus's questioning, and it was soon clear that her show of weakness was all just an act, particularly when it was revealed that Tom's left hand was crippled and withered from an accident many years ago, making it practically impossible for him to have inflicted the injuries on Mayella or hold her down to assault her. When Tom finally got the chance to testify, his account of that day was simple, straightforward, and the complete opposite of the Ewell's accusations. He had helped Mayella on several occasions, out of kindness because she was poor and lonely. On the day in question, she had asked him inside to fix a door, an invitation which turned out to be a trap, as Mayella, desperate for human connection, had tried to force a kiss on him. Tom refused as gently but firmly as possible, but when her father appeared, he fled, not out of guilt, but fear of what a black man might be accused of in such a situation. Despite the seemingly clear evidence, the outcome was sadly always fixed from the beginning. The jury returned with a guilty verdict, much to the horror of the onlooking children, who learned at that moment how unfair the world could be. As an older youth, Jem was particularly devastated to have to face the bitter reality that reason and morals meant nothing in situations like these. A black man's word in the Deep South meant nothing against the word of a white person, no matter how flawed it might be. Soon after, more bad news arrived. Tom Robinson had been shot 17 times while trying to escape from prison, a tragic end which was sadly all too predictable. And while the rest of the world quickly moved on, there was one man who had nothing better to do than stew over his public humiliation. Bob Ewell, who had been torn apart by Atticus during the trial, was not prepared to let it go. He began to threaten Atticus and even spit on him, but the level-headed lawyer always brushed it off with his usual calm demeanor. Autumn rolled around, and with it the school's annual Halloween pageant. Scout was given the prestigious role of a ham for her debut performance, and had a suitably bulky and clumsy costume designed for the part, made of chicken wire and fabric. After the fiasco of a play had ended, Jem and Scout made their way home in the thick darkness, but the night was too quiet, even for Maycomb. Suddenly, there was movement behind them. Bob Ewell, too cowardly to attack Atticus, had decided to lie in wait for his children instead. In the struggle, Scout was squeezed to within an inch of her life and stabbed by a knife, but miraculously spared by her costume. Trapped inside the ham, Scout could do nothing as she heard her brother knocked down, followed by a sickening crunch and Jem's screams. But just when all seemed lost, a shadow emerged from the darkness, stabbing their attacker under the ribs with his own knife and killing him. Jem, who had had his arm broken in the scuffle, was carried home unconscious by their mysterious protector. It was only after the commotion at home died down that Scout finally realized who it was that came to their rescue. It was the man who had once haunted her imagination and terrified the neighborhood children, Boo Radley. He was silent, pale, and almost ghost-like, but was really a gentle, watchful soul who had quietly cared for her and Jem these many years. It was he who had left them gifts, shielded them from harm, and quietly befriended them. And now he had saved their lives. To protect Boo from public scrutiny, the sheriff insisted that Bob's death be ruled an accident, and although Atticus was hesitant to cover up the truth in this way, he too realized that exposing Boo and putting him under trial would only do more harm than good. That evening, Scout stood on Boo Radley's porch after walking the gentle giant home, and looked out at the world through his eyes. She thought of the years he had spent behind those walls, watching them laugh, play, and grow, never joining them, but always in their company. For the first time, she understood what it meant to really see someone, and walk in their shoes. Boo disappeared back into his house, and Scout returned home. She had grown up in more ways than one. She saw the world for what it was, unfair and cruel at times, especially to those who were most vulnerable. But through it all, her father had shown her that you could still be brave, be kind, and live with integrity, even if nobody else would.